Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Anchor Your Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Barbara Gullen, hanging out at the end of this roller coaster of a week in the market with my buddy and pal, Tony Shore. How you doing, Tony?
I am doing great, Barb. Great to be here with you once again. Good to see you today.
Thanks.
And
Nice to be seen.
yeah, we are having a great conversation before the start of the show,
We
and
were.
just talking about it started off talking about the trials and tribulations we're each dealing with this week.
Yes.
And I know you've got a lot going on with your business and with your family, so those are always fun. I'm dealing with my dad too, who's crazy. In fact, he called me. It looks like I got a couple phone messages from him just in the last 5 minutes. He's a mess. I have to go down there again this weekend.
Safe travels.
We were also talking about Barb, and I know, but I wanted to get this in before you jump on our hot financial topic, which is women in retirement, closing that gender gap, talking about finances this week and what's been happening this week. But Robin Williams, this past Sunday was the anniversary of his passing, and we are both Robin Williams fans. I don't know how you could not be. I've never met anyone who's not a Robin Williams fan because his acting was so incredible, and he was considered one of the best, and I think the best improvisational comedian of all time. I mean, off the top of his head. And, Barb, his movies and his stand-up are great, but my favorite bits from Robin were his talk show appearances, because he was allowed to completely non-scripted, and that's where he really shined, when he was non-scripted.
He was such a genius, and
his mind was so quick. And then what's sad is what took him in the end was he had Lewy bodies and terrible a brain disease that caused dysfunction and depression. So, and that was a sad way for one of the funniest people I've ever seen. And I believe he's my favorite comedian, and I love comedy, and he's I think easily the best improv comic. I mean,
I agree. I mean, I've heard that he improvised everything when he was the voice of the genie in Aladdin.
Yes, it was all improvised, and then they had to animate it around. He just went in the recording studio and went off, and then they animated it around him, and the other characters' interaction with him were created afterwards. Jeez. So there was none of those parts with the genie were scripted. And there's so many outtakes. You can look them up on YouTube. Like, they had him do one bit, and he would just do probably 10, 12 different versions, like completely going off with different impressions, and then they'd pick which one they wanted and animate that.
And, I mean, he was such a creative genius that, Lewy bodies was really a cruel way for him to end up facing his demise.
And in real life, go ahead.
I had one grandfather who was an engineer, and my other grandfather was a union pressman who actually worked the press line. And, my grandfather, who is the engineer, had a stroke and Alzheimer's. Well, it was a brainstem stroke, we think, but it was Alzheimer's. So it took his mind. My other grandfather had a stroke and was alone at home when it happened. So nobody knew how long it had been since he'd had the stroke. And it was when TPA first came out as an anti-stroke drug, and they wouldn't administer it because they didn't know. And he spent the last 11 years of his life trying to make his body work again. So, the cruelest thing that could have been taken from both of them was. And
your mind is the hardest way to go. And both my parents have now have been diagnosed with Parkinson's. My mom's had it for years. My dad got diagnosed, but he has early onset Lewy bodies dementia, and so does my mom. So it's hard. It's tough to deal with. But the for both of them, laughter was always the best medicine. My dad sits and watches reruns now of the Three Stooges, and it's the happiest he ever gets. Right? But they both loved Robin Williams, and Robin Williams in real life was dyslexic, and that's true. But listen to this.
Is there some reason you don't do? Is it the fact that you get nervous?
Very much so. I suffer from severe dyslexia too. I was the only child in my block on Halloween to go trick or trout. Here we go. Oh, look, here comes that young Williams boy again. Better get some fish. There you go. Say hi to your mom and dad. Hope they find it. Oh.
And let's acknowledge the other voice in that piece.
Johnny
Another
Carson.
great comedian. Yes.
Yeah, that was one of Robin's first that's from one of Robin's first appearances on the Tonight Show, actually. And he was really nervous to come out, and Johnny could tell. And Robin Williams, you'd think, never be nervous. But he asked him, "So you're nervous to be here?" And he said, "Oh yeah, and I'm dyslexic too. That's why I would always go trick or trout." Trick or treat. Here comes the Williams boy, honey, get the fish. That is so funny.
You know, and Carson was intimidating, not because of who he was as a person, but because that could make or break your career.
It would make or break. And that's how Robin Williams, his appearances on there, and he made Johnny laugh so hard he cried and almost fell off his chair a couple times.
Oh my gosh.
Because I was rewatching those, looking for clips for shows, because I knew there was a clip that I wanted to use this week. But speaking of this week, what happened on Monday, Barb?
Oh my God!
Talk to our listeners about the stock market.
Great question.
Yeah.
You know, Monday in the stock market was the worst day we've had since 2022, and we had one of those perfect storm moments again,
right?
Where we had low GDP numbers, or I'm not GDP. We had a low jobs report. Fewer jobs came out than we anticipated. Unemployment was a little bit higher than we anticipated. And really, there was some stuff going on in the foreign markets with Japan. Yeah. We have Iran and Israel having a stare down contest to see if there's going to be something that goes on there.
Right.
And then on top of that, Warren Buffett divested a huge portion of his ownership in Apple.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where if anything could go wrong, it did.
Yeah, and just a lot of little bumps, which are big in one sense, but and the Fed not lowering interest rates also upset the market. So the market reacted starting Thursday and Friday, right, the week before, but Monday morning was people started to panic. I opened up CNBC Monday morning, Barb, and it said, recession fears grow, and experts talk about recession and major correction, and it's the media is always the sky is falling, right? Dow is down, or the S&P is down 1,100 points or whatever. But then if you would wait until the afternoon,
did not go down 1,100 points.
Yeah, I know, but whatever it was maybe the Dow was down 1,100 points, and the S&P was down. It's down
substantially,
8 points, or 8 points or a certain percentage. But then that number kept getting less worse as the day went on. The headline said Dow down, and it was 400 points. It just kept it already started to improve same day.
It did. It came off of its lows, and again. Remember, I reminded everybody of this in 2020 when we had those really big pullbacks.
Sure.
So much of our trading is automated now that there are bots that are just looking at raw numbers. And it's for anybody with computer programming, it's just a simple if then, if this, then that. If this price, then sell. If this price, then sell. So you end up creating this spiral of things that may or may not be really indicative of what's going on.
Sure.
And then a lot of people don't understand that the S&P 500, even though it's the top 500 companies in the United States that comprise that average, it is not equally weighted.
No, it's like seven companies
right.
are carrying it.
It is weighted by the capital value. So and when you have those 7 companies stumble like we did with Apple and Nvidia over the last few days, then all of the sudden even though when you look at earnings across the board, earnings are looking really good right now.
Yeah. It's not like Apple's not making money, because they're
Right.
making money hand over fist, and so are all those major companies.
And so are a lot of those other top 500 companies that aren't as heavily weighted in the
Right.
S&P. So the S&P, even though it's a broader picture of the market than the Dow, because the Dow is only 30 stocks, not 500, it's still a little bit skewed because of the weighting.
Yeah.
And that's
But what
not,
you're saying, is don't panic.
Right. There's no reason to panic. The professionals on Wall Street are really hoping that you'll panic and sell right now,
Sure.
because they're going to go in and do some bargain hunting.
Right. Yes, they are. And we are due for a correction, and that was actually a blip of a correction. I mean, usually corrections are a little deeper and last longer, but the market has been due for a correction because we've seen record highs the past 12 months, right?
We have, and year to date, the S&P is still up. At the beginning of the week, it was still up at least 9%, even after what had happened on Monday. I'm not sure where it is after the rest of this week. We've had a couple of up days, but we're going to see the market basically, in my opinion, probably do a lot of crab walking through the end of the year, where we're going to go up a little, down a little, up a little, down a little. I don't think we're going to see any super trends upward. We've got volatility with the election. We've got all of these other things going on. This is why the stock market is not a short-term investment. That's
right.
Why
we'll probably still end up for the year. The stock market will probably be up for the year. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is where, now I get to pull out my movie quote again from Mrs. Doubtfire. This was not Robin Williams, but I think it's totally appropriate. So did you ever wish that sometimes you could freeze frame a single moment in your day, look at it and say, this is not my life? If we freeze frame that one day in the market, that is not the market.
Right. It's just, in fact, one morning of the market of major downtrend. We had one morning of major downtrend. And you're right. That's a great quote. Speaking of that, but the aspect of this that I find interesting is that a lot of people reacted and said, oh, should I put everything in cash? Should I pull all my money out of my 401ks, my IRAs, my stock accounts? And you don't want a person that's panicking or to make emotional decisions like that. In fact, you want to be putting money into the market when it's down, but when
you're still working, yes. And,
yes, obviously when you're still working.
This is an environment that opens up a lot of predatory people, where you are going to get these emails that you didn't even know you were on an email list, telling you that there is a massive, colossal crash in the market coming, and that you need to sell everything and buy gold. Or that if for $27.97, if you buy my book, I'll give you all of the answers you need to avoid losing all of your money. Please, for the love of all that is holy and my favorite sandwich, do not click on those, and do not give those people your money.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. A friend of mine, Robin, was on an airplane on Monday morning, unfortunately, and this is what he heard from the pilot.
It's interesting to be here. Flying down there's a little scary. They always have a pilot going, hi, this is your pilot. Before we take off, I just want you to know I invested a little money in the stock market. And let's see if those insurance forms pay off.
That would not be a good thing to hear Monday morning when the stock market's crashing from your pilot.
Right. And this is when it's time to, if you haven't already started working with a fiduciary and a professional financial advisor, this is the time to get some help, so that you don't make a reactionary decision in the moment that could have longer repercussions, because you lock in that loss. You lock in, then writing it out and letting I won't say let the chips fall where they may, but we know that over time the market is going to recover.
Yep. Yeah. And that's important, but also, and if you're in retirement, when there is a market drop, there is reason for concern, but don't make emotional decisions. That's why you need a plan and to work with somebody like yourself, Barb. And I'm glad we're talking a little bit about this, but also, speaking of retirement, for women in retirement, and we've had shows on women in retirement or finances for women, how it can be more difficult than men because they live longer, because of a lot of different factors. And today you wanted to talk about a couple of points, and I want to make sure we get that in. I mean, we kind of had a special show today because of the market volatility. You said you wanted to address that, but how do we close the gender gap for women in retirement?
Well, it takes an intentional effort. For most women, we take time off to raise the kids, a lot of us do, some of us don't. And, if we have a marriage where you have a breadwinner and you have somebody else who's staying home to take care of the kids, statistically, it's going to be the woman that stays home. And, Investopedia had an article that came out in March. I will make sure that there's a link to this article in the show notes. But 50% of women who are between 55 and 66 have no personal retirement savings at all, while only 47% of men in that same age group are in the same situation. Now, first of all, let's sit back and say that if you are 55 to 66 and you haven't saved anything for retirement, that's a whole other show and a whole other set of problems that we need to deal with at another time, because there's no Social Security was never intended to replace a pension or retirement. It was designed as a supplement to those things. And what we deal with women is, again, if we're taking that time out in the early years, everybody thinks, well, she can go back to work when the kids start school and make it up. But what gets lost in that time is all of those years of interest and growth compounding on the money that could have been there.
Right.
So,
right. And probably not contributing to that 401k at a work account like a 401k,
right.
a retirement account through your employer where you get a match. So you're missing out on that free money, and you're missing out on the compounding interest from all of that, right?
Right. And, part of it is the pay gap. It still exists. Women make 84 cents for every dollar a man makes. So if you are saving a percentage of your income, if a man is saving 5% and a woman is saving 5%, she's saving less, even though the percentages are equal.
Right.
So,
right. Because she's saving 5% of a lesser amount. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, in that Investopedia article, there's a table that talks about median retirement savings by generation for men versus women. Okay. Generation X, which you're Gen X, so am I.
Yep.
Okay.
Even though you're much younger than I am Generation X. I'm in the older
Well,
side. You're on the younger side. Yeah.
no,
Take the compliment. You don't have to
taking the
address it.
compliment. I'm more in the middle of Gen X.
Sure.
But Generation X, the median savings for men is $127,000. The median savings for women is $51,000.
Oh, there's a huge disparity there.
Right. And for millennials, it's a little bit better, but not much. Men have saved 63,000 and women 29,000. So, men are still more than double. For Gen X, it's 2.5 times the difference there. It's just one of those things where you need to be intentional about saving for retirement. And the best thing that if you choose to stay home, more power to you. I did it. I stayed home with my girls when they were young, and they're 6.5 years apart. So I actually ended up with a more extended time of being out of the full-time workforce than I initially planned. But if you're going to be out of the workforce, even if you aren't working, if you're married, you can still contribute to a spousal IRA and continue to build that nest egg. You can't put as much in it as you could if you were working and had a 401k, but putting away $7,000 a year is better than putting away zero.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of strategies and options. And I know you've talked about some of these in past shows, Barb, that you help your clients utilize to make sure that they're putting enough away, especially if one of the spouses is going to pass away first. You have to assume that women typically outlive men, so they have to plan for that. And I know you help your clients, whether it's men, women, or couples, but especially the women out there, you have a lot of strategies to help keep this from happening, them
We really
struggling
work
in
hard to
retirement.
do that. We
Yeah.
work hard to do that. I have been in a place where I can empathize with quite a few women that a lot of other planners can't. I have been in the place where I faced my then husband potentially, he had cancer and I really wasn't in the workforce and we were self-employed. So
Wow. Ouch.
what does, yeah, yeah. I mean,
There's some strategies and planning needed there.
right. I have been through a divorce after a long-term marriage. It's helpful to have somebody who, even though the end chapter might look a little different, has seen some of those same chapters and who has walked out some of those same feelings. Everybody's
Sure.
experience obviously is unique, but I have also got, I have worked with other clients where the woman was the breadwinner and was the saver, and
Mhm.
then ended up going through a divorce and watched half of her nest egg go to the spouse simply because they're in a community property state.
Yeah, that's not good. But you've also helped so many clients in so many different situations and scenarios that you
We've seen a
have
lot
you
over the
have
years.
the experience. Yeah.
Yes. And, sometimes the circumstances aren't as dire when you look below the surface, or there are course corrections we can make if we've still got a bit of a timeline before somebody retires to help make up for some of that lost time.
Yeah.
But for the younger listeners on this program, participate in your employer's retirement plan. Set up an IRA on the side if that's available to you. Setting up those things now and letting that money just percolate and grow will create a totally different landscape for you when it comes time for retirement than what the average person is looking at. I mean, it is a little bit daunting that those numbers are what they are for Gen X, and even for baby boomers. Women on average have 100,000 saved for retirement versus men having $248,000.
That's crazy.
It is, and when you
Those
consider
stats
the
are
potential,
mind-blowing.
it's scary. And to go into the thought of a long-term care situation like both of your parents are in, that $100,000 or $248,000 isn't going to last very long at all. I don't have to tell you that.
Yeah, my mom's cost, fortunately, she doesn't have to pay for all of it because of insurance and Medicaid in her case. But my dad does have to pay for some of it. My mom and dad still have to find money for some of it. And it's $11,000 a month just for her because she needs everything, right?
Right.
She's in the memory issues now. She can't do anything on her own. and she's been
Right.
there 2 years. You do the math. It's not sustainable. Long-term care is a crisis in this country, and you cannot be properly prepared without working with somebody like yourself, Barb. I want our listeners to understand that at least 1 out of every 2 people on average will need long-term care. So there's a
Mhm.
good chance you or your spouse will need it, if not both, like in my parents' cases. Now my
Mhm.
dad's in assisted living, but will soon need, we're finding he will
Mm.
soon need long-term care, unfortunately. And my mom's been there over 2 years now. And so that's tough. And it's just not a great place to be. Their family farm, which my grandfather grew up on, my father grew up on, and I grew up on, is
Mhm.
probably going to have to get sold. And
Yeah.
it's never been outside the Shore family since it was homesteaded in 1855. And now
Wow.
it's got to go because of long-term care, probably. And so that is criminal. And I'm so upset that there's nothing being done about it, but that's my high
Mhm.
horse. But if my parents had worked with somebody like yourself, Barb, that could have been avoided, because you work with estate planning
Mhm.
attorneys. If they had started early enough on and been more communicative about their issues, and if they had done the right things and had somebody guiding them, they would not be in the same situation where they might lose the farm, and the
Right.
family would lose the farm. Now, I don't care for myself, but for them and my dad, it's his dream to keep that going in the family. And,
And
so
there's an emotional component to that you're
yeah,
never gonna be able to put a price tag on.
no,
It's, and we don't want to burden our kids with
right.
taking care of us. I tell my clients every time, my hope is that you do what my dad did ultimately and just fall asleep one night and don't wake up the next morning. But
Yeah.
in the event that that doesn't happen, we need to be prepared for that
Yeah.
so that, you aren't a financial burden to your kids, so that
Yeah.
we're not in a place where we have to do a Medicaid spend down and
Yeah.
take you down to just the barest of assets.
Yeah.
Nobody's standing at the altar when they're in their 20s or early 30s getting married thinks about those kinds of things.
No, and you don't want to burden them with this heavy thought process, but at some point you got to get going on it, and the earlier the better. But before we go, Barb, I know the key is working with a financial professional who is holistic, looks at the big picture, and
Mhm.
I'm not going to name names, but I know someone, Barb Gullen, who could do that for you. Barb, how can our listeners and viewers get a hold of you?
They can always go to our website at anchoryourretirement.com. There's a contact form that gets filled out there that we will see, and somebody from our scheduling team will reach out to you. I'm not the only fiduciary in the office. There are 2 other fiduciaries that I work with
That's
very
fantastic.
closely. So it's also a comfort to my clients to know that if anything were to ever happen to me, that there are other fiduciaries that can step in and take over. It won't miss a beat. They can also call us at area code 913-553-6222. And we will have to revisit this topic again about closing the gender gap with women in retirement.
I know we barely
Um,
touched on what you
we
needed because
barely
we got off
today
base,
'cause
but
all of
that's
the
my
good things
fault. But
going on this week. Yeah,
yeah,
I wouldn't call it fault. I mean, this is a week where, you know, if we're going with movie quotes to go back to Overboard, it's a hell of a day at sea, sir. So
it's a heck of a day at sea, sir. I love that. All right. I love Overboard too. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, right?
I
And then
haven't seen the remake. I don't think I want to.
no, I heard that was bad. I didn't see it either, but the original Goldie Hawn movie is fantastic. She is awesome too. Well, hey, great show
They're
today. We
excellent
will
comedians.
revisit the topic, but we got to go. And Barb, great show today. Listeners, that
Thank
does
you,
it for
Joey.
today's episode of Anchor Your Retirement with our host, Barb Gullen.
We'll see you soon.